All right, so we have obviously left the Whitehead Plantation and we are now in the Waverly Hall Town Cemetery, which actually started as a church graveyard. What was the name of the church?
This was Mount Zion Methodist Episcopal Church, and this was the first Methodist church founded west of the Flint River. It was founded by the Whiteheads and the Mahone families, and of course William Osborne, one of the first settlers. And I think since we've been to the Whitehead home, it's all together fitting and proper that we should come out here and meet the family.
Absolutely.
So, the Whiteheads did not have their own family cemetery, or the Whiteheads, because they were members of the church here. And this was a very well-to-do church. Early days, from the early days of settlement on up till the Civil War, this was a very politically oriented church. You were in high plantation society if you went to Mount Zion Methodist Church at Waverly Hall. It was just a very large church at the time. It stood down there by the magnolia tree, and of course later when the railroad came through Waverly Hall, the Methodist church was moved into town. But before those days, the church was here. There used to be a little boarding school across the road known as the Foster Institute. But here we have Mr. William Whitehead, the first settler, right over here. And this is his wife, Catherine Whitehead.
Catherine Whitehead, wife of William Whitehead. I see March 20th. It looks like 1790 something. Is that right?
I believe so, and then died in 1870.
There it is, 1871. 18, looks like 91.
And then that's William Whitehead.
He was born 1787 and died 1870.
I believe it's supposed to be a 3. I'm not certain about that, but I knew it was in the early 1870s, and I believe, if my memory serves me correct, I believe that's a 3. But William and his wife Catherine, they had a son named John Thomas Whitehead. And this is John Thomas Whitehead's grave. John Thomas died in 1861. They say he got sick and died. Well, he had a house full of children by his first and his second wife. He was married twice. His first wife had a couple of children, then she died. He remarried, and his second wife, who's buried right here, Catherine McGee Whitehead, she and he had several children together. Well, at the time of his death, his estate was, of course, went into limbo. The war came on. His father lived through the war, and then his death occurred. And when his death occurred, his will still included John Thomas because he had never updated it. So that is where the, I guess you would say, the disagreements came in amongst different members of the family. But anyway, make a long story short, this right here is William Whitehead's daughter, Susan. Susan married Anderson Jones, and they built a big house in Waverly Hall that was on the hill where the Methodist parsonage is now. And that house later became the Pitts house. In other words, the house was sold to Susan's niece and her husband after the Civil War. But Susan died in 1861 also, just before the war started. And her husband sold their interest here and moved away. But William Whitehead, being one of the first settlers here, his brother Thomas is buried right over here. Now this is Thomas and Mary Whitehead's graves. Now they were never marked, other than these stones. They never had children.
Wow. And it's interesting to me, especially with these. So you had said earlier that the Whiteheads were extremely wealthy, and they were one of the big 3 families from Harris County back then, right?
That's correct.
And so obviously the son and the daughter have very nice stones here, very elaborate stones, but it's interesting to me that all of this wealth, and they have very what we'd consider very plain graves for being so very wealthy.
Well, William and his wife died after the Civil War. After the war ended, they lost most of their fortune. So the family did pretty good to be able to buy these slabs to put on these graves, because in the 1870s, most people that died between 1865 and 1875, their graves were not marked. That went for everybody.
It's a post-Civil War depression.
Unless you really had a lot of money stuck back or you had a good income, you could not afford frivolous things like a grave marker. But Thomas Whitehead and his wife, of course, they died without children. They both died after the Civil War ended. And Thomas's estate also, because he had no children, it was probated by the same family members that was probating William's and John Thomas's. So you had a big Whitehead mess. Anyway, it was finally settled, but there were some members of the family that never spoke to one another again. They lived in the same town for the next 100 years, and they would not even acknowledge one another. So anyway, one of the other Whiteheads, John Thomas Whitehead's first wife, is buried right over here. Okay, this is Mrs. Mary. She was the daughter of George Osborne. George and William Osborne were the two very first settlers here in Waverly Hall. William Osborne was the one that named the town. Well, this was George Osborne's daughter, and she married John T. Whitehead as his first wife. And before her death, she had a daughter. She and Mr. Whitehead had a daughter named Mary James Whitehead. Mary James Whitehead married Irby H. Pitts. Irby Pitts had a son named William Pitts, and William Pitts was the philanthropist that was well known through Coca-Cola and later all the Methodist circles and Emory University and colleges and all that, what have you. But anyway, that's how the Whiteheads descend down to the Pitts family, who employed Samantha Street at their home here in Waverly Hall. This is one of she and John T. Whitehead's other daughters that died at an early age. And she married one of Mr. Irby Pitts' brothers, Samuel Pitts, I believe. And you visited their plantation cemetery out on the highway going to Hamilton some time back. But William Whitehead, shortly after he came to Waverly Hall, he had two sons that died. They were young boys, and I was always told that they developed a fever, and they died within a short time span from one another. And they are two of the earliest marked graves here in the cemetery. This cemetery, by the way, is now kept by the town of the city of Waverly Hall. But they're kind of hard to read, but this one is William, son of William and Catherine Whitehead.
It's like 1822, 1834.
He died in 1834. And that one over there, this one died October the 16th of 34. And I believe this one died October the
27th.
1834. If I remember well, seems like one of them they were like 12 and 13 years of age. They were very young, just young brothers. And supposedly, right here above these graves are some of the Mahone family. Now that used to have a rock wall around it, and the rock wall was taken down years ago by someone who was maintaining the cemetery at the time. So William Whitehead, between him and his brother and William's children, they pretty much had the plantation area, which is now Waverly Hall, all tied up as farms. in the early days. William had another daughter in addition to Susan and the one buried over there that we just visited, and John, his son John. He had a daughter named Elizabeth. All right, Elizabeth Whitehead married Benjamin, well, his name was Bennett V.R. Body, and it's B-O-D-D-I-E. Some people pronounce it Bodie, some pronounced it Body, but the old white families pronounced it Body. Well, Bennett Body and his wife owned all the plantation land east of the Whitehead place. They owned several hundred acres of land, and I think he was one of the top slave owners in Harris County besides William. Well, when the Civil War was winding down, they started drafting men of that were able to go fight, and even the old ones that weren't able to go fight. They were drafting every male that they could get. Well, Bennett had avoided the war all the way through. He was a member of the home front, so he was here being part of the home guard. Well, he got drafted, and he went and participated in the Battle of Atlanta, and they wound up fighting all the way down to the Battle of Griswoldville, and that's where he died. So he was buried somewhere there near the battlefield. But his wife, Elizabeth, she continued to live on the plantation, and after the war ended, and I'd say 10 or 15 years later, she wound up moving to Atlanta. And the plantation was sold. It was divided up. The Kilpatrick family bought a good bit of it, and the Camp family bought a lot of it. But I went to Oakland Cemetery to find her grave. And I just happened to be in Atlanta, and I thought I'll go by here and see if I can locate her grave, because I had heard that's where she was buried. Well, I went there and went into the office, and I thought, they're going to send me on a wild goose chase. They'll give me a plot number and tell me that it's a mile away, and I'll have to walk all that distance. So I went in and I said, I'm looking for the grave of Elizabeth Whitehead Body. And the lady turned around and pointed out the window, and she said, there it is, right there. So it was right outside the window of the office, and it was a very nice marked grave, and it's Elizabeth and one of her daughters and her son-in-law, all buried in one plot there. And Oakland Cemetery was a very, very upscale cemetery at the time she was buried. So Elizabeth still had some of her fortune at the time of her death. She was quite well off.